I'm really looking forward to this, and give a massive hand for Piers Adams.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's great to be here. As Andy said, I've been here as a player on 2 previous occasions, just to provide a bit of musical entertainment, and I've always sat and listened to the lectures with great interest and didn't necessarily think I'd be giving one myself, but it feels like quite a portentous occasion to do so. With the we had the lunar eclipse last night, and I don't know if you noticed today we had this strange wet stuff falling from the sky, which I've forgotten what that even was. But I'm going to call this talk The Dangerous Musician, as you can see, and it's inspired by a quote, which you may have seen this one. It's been on the internet, and it was attributed to McCarthy, but actually it's the result of a conversation between Queen Victoria and the King of Belgium. Beware of artists. They mix with all classes of society and are therefore the most dangerous. And so I think this is a very interesting point, the idea of artists and musicians actually being a danger to whom? Well, I would contest they are a danger to everybody who wishes to control the way that we think and live. And so in that list we would have royalty, politicians, capitalists, bankers, religious leaders, scientists, rationalists, and so on. And it's not really just because we mix with lots of people across a range of classes. It's also because of the very essence of what we're dealing with, which is music itself. Now, I'm sure we all have a relationship with music of some kind, but music, as we know, is very powerful. It's something which can bring about great change, both on a personal, spiritual level, but also in society as a whole. So, yeah, it's definitely true we mix with all classes. I'm reminded of a moment after a concert, actually not far from here in Wells Cathedral, when I was sitting with my very good and sadly late friend Julian, who was the original keyboardist in my band. And there's a posh dinner afterwards, and a rather crusty old lady was sitting next to Julian and said to him, "So how is it for musicians these days?" And he said, "Well, you know, same as ever, really. Everybody wants to know a musician, but nobody wants their daughter to marry one." Many reasons for that, maybe. I want to start really with a quote here, which I hope I can read on. We can probably read it better than I can, but it's on my screen here. This comes from a writer called David Ackert from the LA Times. I don't know anything about him, but it's such a wonderful thing. And again, this was circulating around the internet. "Musicians are some of the most driven, courageous people on the face of the earth. They deal with more day-to-day rejection in 1 year than most people do in a lifetime. Every day they face the financial challenge of living a freelance lifestyle, the disrespect of people who think they should get real jobs, and their own fear that they'll never work again. Every day they have to ignore the possibility that the vision they have dedicated their lives to is a pipe dream. With every note, they stretch themselves emotionally and physically, risking criticism and judgment. With every passing year, many of them watch as the other people their age achieve the predictable milestones of normal life, the car, the family, the house, the nest egg. Why? Because musicians are willing to give their entire lives to a moment, to that melody, that lyric, that chord, or that interpretation that will stir the audience's soul. Musicians are beings who have tasted life's nectar in that crystal moment when they poured out their creative spirit and touched another's heart. In that instant, they are as close to magic, God, and perfection as anyone could ever be. And in their own hearts, they know that to dedicate oneself to that moment is worth 1,000 lifetimes. So that really, actually, I probably don't even need to say anymore. That does sum up pretty much everything I'm going to talk about, but I will carry on nonetheless. So yeah, we have kind of twin secrets here, one of which is that to a large extent, we are maybe less touched by materialism than most of Western society. And also, we think we maybe, possibly, who knows, have the secret to life, or one of the secrets to life, in the palm of our hands. So I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet at all here, but this is just something that's occurred to me, and certainly as he wrote there. So we're very resourceful. We have an out-of-the-box lifestyle. I'm sure many people in this room, I don't know if there are any musicians here. Yeah, there's a few hands popping up. And also, of course, this will apply to all sorts of other artistic professions and healers and shamans and so on. But we have to be resourceful. We live out of the box. One only has to look, by the way, if you go to, say, Glyndebourne, the opera house near where I live, there are two car parks, one for the artists and one for the audience. And one of them looks a bit like a sort of BMW showroom, and the other looks little more than a scrap heap. So that sums it up. But we're kind of all okay with that. So there's always been a slightly uneasy relationship between sort of the artistic classes and the aristocratic classes. And in fact, right through history, musicians have been basically owned by the aristocracy. It's the only way they could live. So, you know, every court would have a number of musicians, and they'd be little more than servants, because they've got this thing that the ruling classes want, and so they need to keep this relationship with them. So musicians also have many ways to get to people, and this is something the ruling classes are quite uncomfortable with. And obviously, over history, musicians have been instrumental in bringing about a lot of social change. Often they can reach a large grassroots audience, sometimes an audience of millions that politicians and rulers would give their right arm to be able to get to. And if their message gets a little too dangerous, I was going to scroll on a little bit here, then often this sort of thing can happen. Or this, maybe. And so it's very uncomfortable. And in fact, even worse than this could happen. Or wait for it. And this one nearly made me throw up, actually. So the musician's role, so we're a bit like tricksters. So you may have heard, you know, the myth of the trickster and the importance of the trickster in society. And I just pulled this down from the font of all knowledge from Wikipedia. A trickster, character in a story who exhibits a great degree of intellect or secret knowledge and uses it to play tricks or otherwise disobey normal rules and conventional behavior. A boundary crosser, the trickster crosses and often breaks both physical and societal rules. Tricksters violate the principles of social and natural order, playfully disrupting normal life and then re-establishing it on a new basis. So this is very important. Society really needs tricksters. It would be far, far too ordered without. And I think this is where musicians and other artists come to the fore. In the Greek pantheon, Hermes was the divine trickster, moving freely between the worlds of mortal and divine. And Jung called him the god of the unconscious, or the mediator between the conscious and unconscious parts of the mind. And it's a very, very important part of the therapeutic process. I heard a sentence that stuck in my mind about the idea of the trickster and about Hermes in particular. Now, you've maybe all been in these situations where you're in a conversation, say in a room, in a bar or whatever, and suddenly an energy comes to the conversation, and it's like it moves effortlessly between different subjects, deeply spiritual, completely hilarious, erotic, and so on. And at that moment, Hermes is in the room. And I think that's a really nice way to look at it. And this is what we musicians try to do. We're trying to be a channel of Hermes, a channel of the trickster in the way we play, and also in the way sometimes we live our lives. It's very important that this confusing process is done with good intention, and Jung stresses this, because, of course, you could easily become very egotistical and just confuse for the sake of it, or your own greatness, but it's very important. And this is when it becomes, I say, very important to heal both people and society. Now, we tend to confound that desire to pin things down. And I feel that so much of what we're offered today in this society are kind of an illusion of choice. We're offered binary choices. And the trickster would reject this and find other ways of looking at the world. So a typical binary choices would be left and right, left wing and right wing. Is that a choice? I don't know. Christian and atheist would be another one. So whenever there's a sort of interesting debate going on about evolution or whatever, then they roll out Richard Dawkins and the Archbishop of Canterbury, and those are the two opinions, aren't they? There's nothing else really that really seems to apply, or that get through to the mainstream. If they brought in Rupert Sheldrake to the debate, for instance, that would probably be a lot more interesting. Brexit, in or out? If we had a shake it all about button, that would have been much better, wouldn't it? Maybe. I don't know. So who knows? I mean, when I think of the trickster, I think of somebody like Russell Brand. He's the archetype of this, because he's very, very intelligent, and he's spiritual, and he seems very empathic, and he's got a very quick mind, and he's very funny. I also think of Jeremy Corbyn from a different way. I may be treading on dangerous ground here, but it's not often that a politician appears to rise above, and this one, I think, does. So we shall see whether he meets the same fate as John Lennon. Let's hope not. So Andy said that I've been involved in classical music, and I have been really swimming against the tide of convention for most of that time. In my group, Red Priest, we have, as Andy said, really pushed the envelope of baroque music or early music performance. So I might just give a very brief introduction to what this actually means. Music of the past, generally the Baroque and the Renaissance periods. It's a fascinating time, and I'm going to be talking about it in a minute from a more esoteric perspective. But what has happened in this revival of interest in historic music is that people have done the research, generally academics. They've said, this is how you do it, and everybody does it. People follow the rules, and it becomes very hard to break those rules once they're established. But as often as not, they're only part of the story. Even if they are rules because somebody wrote it back in the olden days, that's still only a person who had a thought and wrote it down, and the fact that it got written down. We have this attitude nowadays where we sort of turn everything from the past into the gospel. If it's been written down, then it has to be true, and we have to follow it. And we're not rebellious enough to actually see they're no different from us. So whether you've written, well, the New Testament or the 9/11 Commission report or whatever, you know, it's written by people with agendas who want you to believe something. And so this is what we found in music. In fact, it's quite interesting that even if you go back to the original times, and this is rather fun here, but if you look back at what musicians at the time were saying back in the 17th and 18th centuries about rules. This is a musician called Matheson, and he said, the rule of nature is in music nothing but the ear. And he later goes on to say, rules are what I like, and as long as I like it. And I think that's a very good lesson for society, and that does come from an 18th century musician. So it's kind of quite hard fighting against it, because you've got the whole of the industry telling you to go one way, particularly when CDs started being made back in the 1980s. the recorded version of a piece of music became like the gospel, and this is what it had to sound like, and you couldn't really deviate from that because the academics had told us. So this becomes something we have to fight against because, of course, music is live. The recording's only ever an approximation. It's only a moment in time like that. So it's something that we've really fought against in our group. And, of course, anyway, one person's meat is another's poison, or tofu maybe here, is another's poison. For instance, if one looks at one of the composers that I play a lot of, Antonio Vivaldi, was known as a great showman. And, however, there is a written example of somebody who went to hear his music and then wrote all about it in a musical journal, and he basically said it was far too fast, it was a terrible blur of notes, and didn't know what he was on, basically. And this becomes, so then as now, there are all sorts of different opinions about how things should be done. Now I want to talk about music itself. I'll just move, oh no, there's a couple of things here. I've missed out one. Here we go. Schumacher. Talking about those binary problems, actually, I should have mentioned this when I was there. Has anyone read this book? Yeah. Good. Schumacher, who wrote Small is Beautiful, of course, but this is a very wonderful little philosophical guide. And he talked about sort of binary problems. He talked about problems that are divergent and problems or arguments that are convergent, and there's a big difference between them. And a divergent argument, like such as left and right, you know, you can carry on arguing the logic of your argument until you're blue in the face, and you're not going to agree with that person who's arguing the exact opposite, which is also entirely logical. And this is where we get these arguments set up, where there's no point, it becomes completely futile, and I occasionally do this on social media and give up after a little while. There's literally no point trying to change someone's opinion if that's the way they're going, that's the way you're going. A convergent argument, Schumacher gives the example of designing a bicycle. So you come up with, you have all of these parameters, and then finally you come together, and now you've got pretty much a perfect person-powered, two-wheeled machine. You can't really improve on that. So that's convergent. Divergent, he gives the example of education. He says, in education, you've got the kind of disciplinarian, authoritarian way of teaching children, and you've got the free, liberal, child-centered way of teaching. And they both have a lot going for them in different ways, but you could argue each case. And he says, if you take the example of someone who's actually just been a very, very good teacher all his life, say, and is asked about this, he'll say, I don't know about any of that, you've just got to love the little buggers. And that is true. So rather than going left or right, you have to go upwards above the argument. And again, this is the role of the trickster, to take us out of binary arguments and into a different realm. Music. Dangerous. So music, as you can see, does all of these things, encourages creative and expansive thinking, it promotes left and right brain harmony, points us to mystical numinous realms, produces tricksters and rule breakers, connects people together as one, powerful emotions in large groups of people, rouses people to protest and change, gives voice to non-establishment heroes with a potentially large following, as I've been talking about. Music is, of course, just sound. Music is just sound. It's just vibration, and vibration is in everything. Everything we see and feel and hear, and everything in the universe is simply vibrating energy, as we all know, and music is just an aural range of that same vibration. And so I want to look at music from both a sort of physical and a kind of spiritual, non-physical direction, and see that actually this isn't a binary argument, they're the same thing. So music, first of all, is simply sound waves. And I'm going to just move on to this, if I can get there. This has nothing to do with that. So if you pluck a string on a stringed instrument, you can see it vibrating, and it's a sound wave. The wavelength is the length of the string. You get a note. If you stop the string halfway along and you pluck it, you get a note exactly an octave above. I'm going to assume a very base level of music here. Some of you are probably experts, and some of you may be Even that's too much, I don't know. But anyway, so once you go up an octave, so you go from a C to another C. Sounds like the same note, but the wavelength is exactly half. Okay, so this is a very important aspect. Ratios are really, really important in music as they are in nature and as they are in the universe. If you stop it a third of the way along, you get the interval of a fifth. This is a bit confusing if you're not a musician, because it's a third of the way along and it's a fifth. So these are two different number systems I'm using, the fractions of the string and the intervals of the scale. For anyone who doesn't know, you go up a scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then back to 8 again, which is 1 again. That's the octave. So when I say a fifth, it's 2. The interval of a fifth, rather like an octave, if you play, this may not be a clean octave, because I'm going to play 2 recorders at once. It's quite a clean one. It's got quite a pure sound, because the wavelengths are exactly matching. If you slightly detune the octave, you can start to hear interference patterns, because the wavelengths are not exactly matching. Unpleasant sound. Okay, sound of a school of recorder students. And a fifth is a similar, because a fifth is a 3-to-2 ratio. I said you stop the string a third of the way along. That's not a very clean fifth. I'll try and find it. You can hear when it comes clean. And then when it's not, you start to get very fast beats going on in your ear. And this is how instruments are tuned, by eliminating those beats. So if you then hold the string, so we've done a third of the way along. If we then go, here we go, see the top one there, there's a third of that will produce a fifth. The quarter will produce actually another octave above, because that's then a ratio of 2 again. A fifth would then produce, oh dear, it's going to be confusing, because a fifth is going to produce the interval of a fourth. There's no other way to describe this, I'm afraid, so I'm just going to have to bear with this. A fourth in musical terms would be a C to an F, say, which is another clean interval. Wasn't very clean, anyway. So it's quite easy to tune fourths and fifths. You carry on up, you start to get more harmonious intervals, like a third. Very recognizable, and then further up, that's a major third. You can get a minor third. And immediately, with a minor and a major third, you get a different emotional effect, because a major third sounds bright, and then it has some effect on us. I don't know exactly why. It's only a different wavelength ratio. Just for those who are interested in such things, obviously, as you're going up, you're getting these ratios, but they're going up the octave all the time. They're getting higher and higher and higher. But eventually, you keep stopping that string more and more times in even ratios. You will actually, across several octaves, you'll get every note of the chromatic scale, or the diatonic scale, which is the scale upon which music throughout history has been based. So if you pull all of those notes down into one octave by halving and quartering the wavelength, so then you will have a complete chromatic scale, which will be, and then back to, and those are the notes which composers have worked with throughout history, because they are there in nature. And that's very important to remember, because we really like ratios, and it's uncomfortable when our ratios are slightly out. We get that uncomfortable beating sound. Apparently, a bone was found dating from Neanderthal times, 45,000 years ago, with holes carved out of it, which suggest that this bone was in fact tuned to a diatonic scale. So they seem to even know about it then. And certainly by 2000 BC, there are, if I can find this one, here we go. This is that, believe it or not, is a diatonic scale. Don't quite know why, but anyway, that's from a Sumerian tablet from 2000 BC. So they've known about this for a long time. Now, the most interesting thing is that these notes actually all go on at the same time. So when you pluck a string, you actually get all of these resonances going on simultaneously. You hear the main one, but all the other nodes are ringing, and this provides the sort of complexity of sound in a note. If you have a computer to generate a sine wave, which is a pure waveform, it's a very, very flat sound. But once you play it on an instrument, it's much richer, and the reason it is because we have all of these ratios and harmonics going on simultaneously. And the ones nearest, the fundamental is the main one, the big wavelength, and then the first harmonic, the second harmonic, and so on. Obviously, the ones nearest the fundamental you'll hear most loudest. Now, I want to try something. I've never done this before, and this could be quite embarrassing, but I was trying it in the car as I drove over here. Has anyone here ever tried overtone singing? Okay, so you probably know more about this than me, but I'm going to suggest we all try this, because you can actually hear the harmonics, because they're so much part of our makeup and of nature that I feel it's really important to hear how they're actually inside our bodies. So if we sing a note on an or sound, and then we move our tongues and close our mouths up to make more like an E sound, like that. And then if you make it a bit more caught in your throat, like okay, so we try it on a note, and as you go up, if you listen really carefully, it may not be possible in a room full of people. If you listen carefully, you can hear something going up and up and up, which are the harmonics, different harmonics coming out. And if you really tune your ear into them, you can see they jump. It's not like a continuum. They jump from one harmonic to the next, and you can actually hear that. You try that we'll try it now in the room and see if we can hear anything. Let's go. It's a nice sound. I don't know if we got anything there. I suggest it is one to try on your own, but it is very interesting. I could do it on a recorder as well. Take a bass recorder. It's got lovely harmonics on the bottom note of a bass recorder. And I can overblow. And if I can spit and blow at the same time, I can get lots of the harmonics out. I can't get higher than that. But I could theoretically go out and get all of those chromatic scale notes, but they'd be right up in the stratosphere in terms of pitch. I'm going to play a little piece, actually. Why not? Just for a moment, using these sounds. No, that's just a... So music can be very simple. Now, so this is the harmonic series I've just described, and we can hear it. It's very closely related to the Fibonacci sequence, and which, of course, creates the golden mean. I haven't got time to go into all of this, but I'm sure many of you will be familiar with it. And this is the sort of sequence by which pretty much everything in nature seems to grow. And it's also according to... Well, hang on, these are the notes, by the way, as you go up. I'll just describe all the different harmonics, get to all the semitones. An astronomer called Johann Bode in 1772 predicted where Pluto would be found because he realized that the positions of the planets out from the sun fitted the harmonic series. And there you go. And that theory held for quite a long time till they discovered Neptune, which didn't fit. So the red are the orbits predicted by Bode's law, and the black are the actual average orbits. And you find this, although it doesn't apply all of the time, it's remarkable how often it does apply. So the orbits of the moons around the planets, they all seem to fit this law. So it's really throughout the universe on a macroscopic and a microscopic level. And as one writer put it, I was reading a wonderful book by David Byrne of Talking Heads called How Music Works, which I really recommend. And He said the harmonic sequence, the first few notes of the harmonic sequence actually play, or if you bring them all into the same octave, what we call a seventh chord. And he said, because of this, fitting with the harmonic sequence, he said it's almost as if the universe plays the blues, which is quite a nice way to look at it. Pythagoras, the Greek mathematician from about 500 BC, I think, considered that there was a thing called the music of the spheres. The planets were all held in the place, all the heavenly bodies were held in place in these giant crystal spheres, and the movements of the spheres together produce this heavenly music, and all music that we produce is an attempt to sort of refine that heavenly music. Maybe wasn't exactly how it's structured, as we know, but NASA actually did something along these lines when they released a series of albums called The Symphony of the Planets, in which they took the sequences of these orbits and they somehow condensed them down into aural frequencies and released them as a series of basically ambient drones. And so you can look that up on YouTube. It's quite interesting. Now, one other thing I want to talk about, and this might seem like a bit of a boring and esoteric subject, but it is actually quite fascinating, and that's the subject of tuning. Because as we've just seen, when the notes are, the wavelengths are nice and pure, in other words, we're not getting interference patterns, then it all sounds harmonious to our ears. And when it goes out from that tuning, we kind of want it to come back again. There's a sort of urge for order, I suppose. But there's a sort of fault in the universe which was discovered by Pythagoras and actually rediscovered by me on my 16th birthday when I received a lilac spinet, which I kept hidden away as a dirty secret in my bedroom. A spinet's a small harpsichord. And I tried to tune it, and I knew that you could get these perfect fifths, so I just started tuning my fifths, and I go down an octave and then carry on. So you go around the whole cycle of all 12 fifths, and when I got back to the beginning, it seemed to be a different note from the one I started with. Has anyone tried this? So that seemed very odd. I tried it again, and it was exactly the same. It was back to, I thought there's something seriously wrong here. But it turns out, Pythagoras discovered this, the mathematics are such that 12 fifths is not the same thing as 7 octaves, and it should be. And we sort of think it. So there's actually a discrepancy in whether I've got the maths of it here. No, let's go back. Let me find the maths. Oh, I was going to give you some maths here. I haven't got it. How unfortunate. Okay, I must have missed this one off my slide. So if you divide, I'm going to blind you with science. Oh, there it is. It's there. Of course it is. 12 fifths and 7 octaves. There's the equation. It comes to 1.0136, blah, 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 blah. And that's a discrepancy of about a quarter tone by the time you get all the way round, which is very unpleasant. This feels like a fault in the universe, because we want everything to be perfect, and actually it's not. Pythagoras got round it when he tuned up in fifths, halfway, tuned down in fifths, the other halfway, and where the keys met, you had this discrepancy. You had a very, very narrow fifth, which sounded absolutely horrible, and you couldn't use it. But he got round that. In those days, the music, they based it around really 1 or 2 keys, which you could play absolutely in tune, and you didn't venture anywhere else, because it sounds awful. But later on, as music developed, composers wanted to use lots of keys. They wanted to use all the possibilities available, so they started compromising. And this wolf, as it was called, the Pythagorean comma, or wolf, this short fifth, was sort of spread out amongst a few other keys, so it was sort of equalized in various places. And also, people wanted pure thirds, and if you have pure fifths all the way, none of your thirds are going to be pure. So that ratio of 3 to 2 is great, but you're not going to get your nice 5 to 4 ratio, which produces a pure-sounding third. So it's you know, we want music to be perfect, and we sort of think it is, but actually there's a fault really built into it, which is kind of what makes it interesting. So in the Renaissance period, they had a thing called mean tone temperament, where they spread that wolf amongst 4 different keys and then tried to avoid using those keys. And as music progressed, they wanted to use more and more different key changes. And by the time of Bach, in the early 18th century, where he, in fact, was the one who invented the well-tempered clavier, which is equal temperament, and that's what we use today. And in that, every single note of the chromatic scale is an exact subdivision, and exactly equal. And what that actually means, if you play a piano that's just been tuned, every single note is actually slightly out of tune. Not one interval is pure, all the way through it. And we've got completely used to this. And I think we've lost something in music, because they were really after that purity in the olden days. One thing I might just touch upon... No, I won't, I'm not going to have time. Okay, forget that. I'll mention the word A432. If anyone wants to look it up, it's a very interesting thing. Pitch that we have chosen. I'll say it very quickly. Apparently, the pitch of where the A is 432 hertz resonates with our bodies and our chakras in a particular way. And some people think there was a conspiracy to push pitch up, possibly by Hitler, to push pitch up to where it is today at 440 or 442 in order to make us all feel slightly uncomfortable. There are arguments for and against that, if you wish to read that. So, development of music I want to talk about. To start off with, we have music across all indigenous cultures and up to the medieval period. Most music was music against a drone, where you have a continuous note and the notes weave around it, creating these lovely intervals that we've seen, harmonic series and whatever else, and they return to the drone. And you'll hear this in any really early music. Let's try this one now, very quickly. Let's have a drone of a fifth. If this half of the room could sing this note. And this half. That's nice. I'm going to play it for a moment. And so on. Okay, so that gives an instance of how that music sounds, where the melody weaves around a constant. Now, this is my theory. I'm going to say this. This music, by the way, continues across all cultures today. If you listen to, for instance, Indian music, where you have the tambura making the drone the whole way through, with music of incredible complexity built around it, I have a theory that the drone represents a constant, like a spiritual core, or the universal consciousness, which is there in us at all times. And many of the societies that use that music today have that as their base philosophy. And we move away from it, but we always return to home, and we know home is always there. And I think that's very interesting, because after that, what happened was they moved away from this idea where you had to have this constant note, and we started developing what we call tonality, where you have your keys, and the keys change, move away, and come back to where you started from. You still have a feeling of home, because if you start in C major, you're probably going to end in C major, but you'll have gone through a few keys along the journey. And this has a different effect on us. It inspires the emotions, but it possibly doesn't empower us in the same way. It's a different journey. And certainly the Renaissance composers realized this, and they used this to great effect. And the church particularly realized what a great thing this does, because it makes people feel actually quite small. And so if you imagine a vast cathedral and some of this Renaissance choral music, which, if this has worked, might sound like this. Okay, this has the effect of making us feel kind of holy, but kind of God's up there somewhere, and it's a little bit scary too. This piece, by the way, this piece is the Allegri Miserere, which was one of the most successful of all pieces of choral music. It was so successful that the Vatican decided it would never leave the walls of the Vatican. So the music was never allowed out. And everyone who came to the Vatican would obviously feel very small and holy. And it stayed in there until a young Mozart one day was taken, he's only a boy of about 6 or something, he was taken into the Vatican by his parents and heard the music and came out and wrote it down straight away from memory. And that's how it got out. But that's quite interesting, the idea then, with this music, God's outside and we're separate. Less empowering. And then we go through the Baroque period. That's definitely the era of the trickster, because then music sort of moved away from the church and became very, very experimental. And that's a lot of the music I play in my group, actually, from that period. I really like that. And then we go into the Enlightenment era. Definition of music pre-Enlightenment, the same dictionary. Pre-Enlightenment, music was defined as a gift of God to be used only in his honor. Same dictionary, after the Enlightenment, defined it as the art of composing tunes and writing accompaniments to them. So it's a very different approach to music. It goes to the 19th century. This idea of the key structure kind of gets more and more stretched, and finally in the 20th century it's broken altogether, and we have this absolute equality where every note of the chromatic scale is considered equal, and you can start at point A and end at point B, and that's absolutely fine. This music, some of you may like it in this room, I find it completely and utterly alienating because it gives us no feeling of home whatsoever. It's like man being far too clever, breaking away from the cosmos and producing this stuff, which really doesn't help. I heard a piece of music a few years ago by a composer called Brian Elias, and he had a medieval instrument playing a drone and a soprano singing a melody over the drone for about 11 minutes, but the melody was in a completely different key from the drone and never once touched a note of the drone at all from beginning to end. And it kind of feels like deliberate alienation. Completely don't understand that. But there's a backlash against this, of course, so obviously, the same time as the tonal system broke down, pop and rock music and all forms of social music grew up, and so that was a very good backlash. Also, there's a new kind of spiritual music with composers like Arvo Pärt and John Tavener, who actually use tonality in a deep and moving way. And I think I need to break off now and actually play a piece myself. You're wondering what this gong's doing here. So I'm going to play a piece of music dating from 1970s sometime. And the reason I want to play this fitted quite well into this talk, because this is an example of contemporary composer touching on quite a deep spiritual topic and trying to express it in music. So it's called Black Intention, and it's by Maki Ishii. And he's trying to show how Buddhism and meditation help us to calm and conquer problems in life. And so he starts off with somebody tripping their way lightly through life on this recorder, and then they encounter a problem which starts to get in the way and eventually parrots their every move until finally the person has a mental breakdown. The second half, maybe the same person having studied Buddhism or somebody else who starts off meditating. Again, a problem comes in terms of some very atonal notes which try to take over, but he manages to calm it, he or she manages to calm it through meditation. So that's what the piece is about. It goes like this. Move this away a bit. Thank you. Thank you. Needless to say, I've got a lot more to say and only a few more minutes to say. I've got 5 more minutes to speak. So very, very quickly, I want to touch on the subject of not just music itself, but the meaning of performance. Ficino and Castiglione were 2 Renaissance philosophers who talked a lot about performance, and they divided the art of performance into these 3 categories. Decoro is everything to do with practice, technique, orderliness, study, and so on. Sprezzatura is the other side of the equation, because it's to do with bringing music to life and putting yourself into it in a very personal way. Improvisation, deliberate nonchalance, all of these words you see here. And these 2 need to work hand in hand in a performance. You have to really put your own self into the music in a very giving way, actually, and be constantly alive, constant surprise and humanity in what you do. So many performers only play with technique, and they're very impressive, but it doesn't move you. Some people might play with a lot of emotion, but it's a bit rubbish in other ways. So it's getting that in balance. And if you can do that, then you may be bestowed with divine grazia, divine grace. And this is a really important thing, and this is really the whole meaning of music, and this is what David Ackert talked about in that quote at the beginning. Divine grace, the state where we're all one, audience and performer. This is the traditional model with the performer in the middle, the audience listening, feeding energy, hopefully back and forth between the two, which is a nice feeling for everyone. But another model might be this, the audience and the performer, and they're both together, in a sense, channeling the source of creative energy. And this is if this situation gets set up, and there are numerous written examples from the period that this was written of what it was like to be in a concert, and the audiences were clearly in a state of ecstatic bliss from the descriptions, rather more like a rave than say, a classical music concert where we're all lined up in rows listening. It's a very different role. And the idea was to draw the soul out of the body via the ears. As one writer wrote, otherwise the soul is trapped in the muddy vesture of decay. That's us. So this is a very, very important part of performance. Probably the most important part, actually, is to try and create this state of grace that was described at the beginning. Much was written about it throughout history, and it applies as much today as it did when these writers were writing. This is Ficino. The soul receives the sweetest harmonies and numbers note through the ears, and by these echoes is reminded and aroused to the divine music, which may be heard by the more subtle and penetrating sense of mind. According to the followers of Plato, divine music is twofold. One kind, they say, exists entirely in the eternal mind of God. The second is in the motions and order of the heavens, by which the heavenly spheres and their orbits make a marvelous harmony. In both of these, our soul took part before it was imprisoned in our bodies, but it uses the ears as messengers, as though they were chinks in the darkness. By the ears, as I've already said, the soul receives the echoes of that incomparable music by which it is led back to the deep and silent memory of the harmony which it previously enjoyed. There you go. That's what music does for us. I've got about 2 minutes to talk about this before I play one more piece. I've got a piece of paper here saying conspiracies today, which I guess was part of the theme of this conference. Have a look at this. Schools must remember. This is a very important thing. Music in schools, I've jumped a few subjects here, but it's sort of relevant because music is really, really important. And an invaluable source for children's mental health. This is a school in Bradford that was right in a very impoverished area, bottom of the league tables. They introduced compulsory 6 hours of creative music to the children every week, and they rose right up to the top. And I've seen that in other schools as well. One would think, therefore, there we go, this is from Harvard University, how important music is. And that's from Simon Rattle. One would think, therefore, that it would be a good idea on all levels to bring music into schools, because it actually also improves cognitive function as well as creativity. And this is where I wonder whether there's conspiracy that the government doesn't really want us to be all creative, wonderful, right-brained, imaginative individuals. It rather wants some worker drones. That's a rather negative way of looking at it, isn't it? So what we need, then, is more musicians, more tricksters, a tsunami of tricksters, I wrote down here, would be a nice thing, to really sort of lift us onto the next level. And I think we need a lot more creative music making at every level. I think one of the problems with music nowadays is it's them and us again, a bit like God and man, musicians and audience. You know, we need much more interaction because it really is something that works between. And music can be played by everybody at whatever level. And the creative act of music is more important than the getting it right. So that's all I can say about that. I've got time to play one more piece of music just, and so I'm going to do so. So with this, I will say thank you very much for listening. And this is a piece of music project which I've developed with somebody called Larry Lush. I don't think that's his real name. Well, no, it's not. He's a synthesizer expert. And I had the idea of bringing Bach and baroque music into modern times. So I'm just going to leave you with this, and thank you. Oh, hang on. I definitely didn't mean to do that, but I shall do it like this instead. Is that going to work? So all of the music here is based on Bach's own music.
ladies and gentlemen, Piers Adams.